All right, so have you heard the story about Spirit Airlines? It's kind of wild.
Yeah, what is it with airlines and making headlines lately?
Well, this time it's about their dress code.
Their dress code, really?
Yeah, they updated it, and let's just say it's causing a bit of a stir online.
Interesting. It seems like a pretty simple thing, but airline dress codes can actually be a bit of a legal minefield.
A minefield. Okay, so walk me through this. What exactly did Spirit change?
So they updated their contract of carriage, which is basically the legal agreement between the airline and the passenger.
Ah, the fine print we all scroll past.
Exactly. But this fine print includes the rules about what you can and can't wear on their planes.
So what's the big change? Did they ban sweatpants or something?
Not quite, but it's close. The new contract says they can refuse service to anyone who is inadequately clothed or whose clothing is lewd, obscene, or offensive, or even if it has an offensive odor.
Offensive odor. Wow. Okay. I mean, I get it. Nobody wants to sit next to someone who smells bad, but inadequately clothed and offensive, that seems pretty subjective, doesn't it?
Mm,
Like what I think is offensive, you might think is totally fine.
exactly. And that's where things get tricky. This vagueness leaves a lot of room for interpretation, which could lead to inconsistent enforcement and even potential bias.
Okay. Yeah, I see where you're going with this.
hmm
So is this a new thing? Have they always had this kind of language in their contract?
Well, there was an incident back in October 2024 that might shed some light on
Oh,
this.
yeah. I think I remember hearing about this. What happened?
Two women were removed from a Spirit flight because they were wearing crop tops.
Seriously, crop tops. That's what got them kicked off a flight.
It sparked a huge controversy online with a lot of people saying Spirit was being way too strict.
I mean, it is 2024, right?
Yeah.
Crop tops are pretty normal.
Right. So this new policy might be their way of trying to clarify their stance and avoid another PR nightmare.
So are they saying no more crop tops on Spirit flights?
Well, the new language doesn't specifically mention crop tops, but it still leaves things open to interpretation.
Okay, I see what you mean. So basically, they tried to clarify things, but it's still kind of vague.
It is, and it raises a bigger question. How much control should airlines have over what we wear?
I mean, that is a good question. On the one hand, they're a private business and they can set their own rules. But on the other hand, they're providing a public service. So where do we draw the line?
It's a complex issue for sure, and it's one that we're seeing play out in other industries as well.
Hmm, yeah, makes you think.
It does.
So basically what you're saying is now I have to worry about more than just getting through security and finding my gate. I got to worry about whether my outfit is going to pass the Spirit Airlines fashion police.
Maybe not quite that extreme, but it's something to be aware of, and it raises some really interesting questions about our rights as passengers.
Okay, so we've got Spirit cracking down on crop tops and offensive clothing.
Yeah.
But this isn't the first time an airline has made headlines for their dress code right. Didn't this something happen with Delta and a T-shirt?
Ah, yes, the Delta t-shirt incident. That one brings up the whole issue of freedom of expression.
Yeah, I vaguely remember this. Can you refresh our memories on what happened there?
So back in October 2024, a woman was asked to change her shirt before boarding a Delta flight because her shirt had a message about veteran suicide.
Oh, wow. And Delta considered that offensive.
They did, even though it was about a serious and sensitive topic.
See, this is what I'm talking about. Who gets to decide what's offensive? And when does an airline's dress code bump up against something as fundamental as freedom of expression?
That's where things get legally tricky. The First Amendment protects us from government censorship, but those protections don't always apply to private businesses like airlines.
So even though we have freedom of speech, that might not apply when we're dealing with a private company.
Exactly. It's a bit of a gray area.
Yeah.
And it really highlights how important it is to understand those contracts of carriage. They're not just boring legal documents, they actually have a real impact on our rights as passengers.
Wow, this is getting way more complicated than I thought.
Ah.
But okay, before we dive into the legal stuff, let's talk about the practical side of things.
Sure.
What are the real-world consequences if you get denied boarding because of what you're wearing?
Well, it's not just about hurt feelings. It can be a logistical and financial nightmare.
Oh yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Missed flights, scrambling to find another way to get where you need to go.
Exactly. It can get really messy really fast.
So it's not just a fashion faux pas.
Yeah,
It's a real headache.
it is. And it brings us back to that fundamental question, how much control should airlines have over what we wear? Where's the balance between maintaining order and respecting individual freedom?
It's a tough one. It's like trying to find the perfect temperature in a car full of people. Someone's always going to be too hot or too cold.
That's a great analogy. It's about finding a compromise that works for everyone.
So what do you think? How do we even begin to tackle this?
Well, I think a good starting point is to acknowledge that these dress codes are often outdated and need to be updated.
Yeah, I mean, some of them feel like they're from a different era.
Exactly. They need to reflect modern sensibilities and cultural sensitivities.
And maybe airlines could get some input from actual fashion experts or even just everyday passengers.
That's a great idea. Get some fresh perspectives and real-world input. Because ultimately, it's about creating a travel experience that is safe, comfortable, and respectful for everyone.
All right, so we've talked about the airline side of things,
Yeah.
but I want to hear from our listeners too. What do you guys think about all of this? As we were talking about those consequences like missed flights and, the financial hit, it really got me thinking.
Oh, about what?
Like, we always think of airports and airplanes as these separate spaces,
Hmm.
almost like they have their own set of rules. But at the end of the day, you're still subject to the laws of the land. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Your rights as a citizen should be protected, even at 30,000 feet.
I see what you mean. It is a unique situation. You're essentially on private property, but it's also a mode of public transportation. So it's this weird in-between zone. Where does the power of the airline end and our individual rights as passengers begin?
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of blurry. And especially when you think about how, for a lot of people, air travel isn't a luxury. It's a necessity.
You're right. And that's why this whole dress code debate is so important. It's not just about fashion. It's about fairness, respect, and making sure everyone has access to safe and reliable transportation, regardless of how they dress.
So, okay, we've established this is a complex issue with some potentially serious consequences. But let's be constructive here. What are some solutions? How do we balance the airline's need for order and safety with passengers' right to express themselves
Yeah.
and, not be unfairly targeted?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Finding that sweet spot where everyone's happy and feels respected.
Okay, so one thing I was thinking, what if instead of these vague terms like offensive or inappropriate, airlines adopted more specific guidelines for their dress codes?
I was thinking the same thing. Instead of these subjective terms that are open to interpretation, what if they provided clear examples of what is and isn't acceptable? Like maybe a visual guide or something.
Yeah, like those TSA guidelines for prohibited items. They don't just say no weapons. They have pictures and descriptions, so you know exactly what you can and can't bring.
Exactly. And it would be especially helpful for travelers from different cultural backgrounds who might not be familiar with American social norms.
Oh, totally. I hadn't even thought about that. But that's so important.
It is. And it could also help minimize the potential for bias. If the rules are crystal clear, it leaves less room for individual interpretation and discriminatory practices.
Okay, so we've got clearer guidelines. What else? I had another idea. What about a standardized dress code across all airlines? That way you wouldn't have to learn a new set of rules every time you fly.
That's an interesting thought. But it might be tough to get all the airlines on board. Different airlines have different brands, different target audiences, and they might be reluctant to give up that control.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. But maybe there could be some basic, universally agreed upon standards, like, the classic no shirt, no shoes, no service rule.
I like that. That could definitely create a more consistent and predictable experience for passengers.
And maybe, just maybe, it would cut down on the number of those viral videos we see of people getting kicked off flights because of their outfits.
One can only hope. But along with clearer guidelines, I think another essential piece of the puzzle is better training for airline staff.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The gate agents shouldn't be the ones making these snap judgments about what's appropriate or not.
Right. It shouldn't be left up to them to interpret these vague policies. They need more guidance.
Exactly. Equip them with the tools and knowledge to handle these situations sensitively and fairly. It's about de-escalating potential conflicts, communicating effectively, and avoiding any discriminatory practices.
You got it. It's about empowering them to be problem solvers, not fashion police.
Totally. And what about the passengers who feel they've been treated unfairly? What can they do?
That's a crucial point. There needs to be a clear and accessible appeals process. Passengers should be able to file a complaint if they feel they've been unjustly targeted or discriminated against.
And that process needs to be fair and impartial, not just the airline investigating itself.
Right, absolutely. Maybe a third-party mediator or an independent review board.
Okay, you know what? I'm actually starting to feel optimistic. Like, maybe there is a way for everyone to win here if we can just figure out the right approach.
I think so too. It's about finding that balance, respecting both individual freedoms and the need for a safe and comfortable travel experience for all.
You know what this reminds me of? That saying, your right to swing your fist ends where my nose begins.
I like that analogy.
We all have our rights, but those rights have to be balanced with the rights and well-being of others.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
It's finding that equilibrium where everyone feels respected and protected.
This has been so eye-opening. I went from thinking this was a silly story to realizing it's about some really important things.
It really is. It's a great example of how seemingly mundane things like what we wear can intersect with some really complex legal and social questions.
So what's the main takeaway? What do we want our listeners to remember?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is this isn't just about clothes. It's about respect, dignity, and the right to be treated fairly regardless of how you choose to express yourself.
Yes. And it's a reminder that as passengers, we have a voice. We can ask questions, challenge unfair policies, and advocate for change.
And hopefully we can do all of that while still rocking a stylish and comfortable airport outfit, right?
Haha, right. But speaking of style, let's get back to that Delta t-shirt incident. Because that brings in a whole other layer of complexity, the whole freedom of expression angle.
It does. It really highlights how these policies can clash with our First Amendment rights.
Right.
And it raises a lot of questions about what constitutes protected speech when we're talking about private businesses like airlines.
Okay, remind me again.
Right.
What exactly happened in that case?
So a woman was asked to change her shirt before boarding a Delta flight because it displayed a message about veteran suicide.
Right, and Delta said it was offensive.
They did. But she argued that she was simply trying to raise awareness about an important issue.
And this is where things get tricky. Because on one hand, the airline wants to create a comfortable environment for everyone. But on the other hand, passengers shouldn't be censored for expressing their views, especially on important social issues.
You're right. It's a tough balancing act, and sometimes it's not clear where the line is.
I mean, seriously, where do you even begin to draw that line? What's offensive is so subjective.
Yeah, it really depends on who you ask. What might offend one person might not even faze another.
Exactly. So how do we even navigate this? How can we make sure airlines aren't overstepping and limiting our freedom of expression?
Well, one approach is to look at legal precedents. There have been quite a few court cases that deal with similar issues, and those can provide guidance for both airlines and passengers.
So basically, it's lawyers battling it out in court to figure out where the line is.
It's definitely a part of it. And those legal battles often shape the policies that airlines end up adopting.
Okay, but those legal battles can take years, even decades. What can passengers do in the meantime if they feel their rights have been violated?
Well, first of all, know your rights. Familiarize yourself with the airline's contract of carriage. And if you're ever in a situation where you feel you're being treated unfairly, don't be afraid to speak up.
Right. But even if you know your rights, it's important to stay calm and respectful.
Oh, definitely. Nobody wants a confrontation to escalate into a viral video.
Exactly.
Right.
And if talking to the gate agent doesn't resolve things, know that you have other options. You can file a complaint with the airline or even with the Department of Transportation.
Right. And remember, there are organizations like the ACLU that advocate for passengers' rights and can provide legal guidance and support.
So knowledge is power. Know your rights, stay calm, and don't be afraid to seek help if you need it.
I couldn't agree more. And at the end of the day, even though this whole dress code thing can feel overwhelming, it's about something much bigger. It's about protecting our individual freedoms and ensuring everyone feels respected and valued no matter what they wear.
So true. Okay. Well, we've talked a lot of the legal and practical stuff, but now I want to get into the actual clothes, like what's considered acceptable attire. Because let's be real, some of these rules seem pretty outdated.
Oh, totally. I agree. Some of these rules are stuck in the past.
I mean, come on, it's not the 1950s anymore. People express themselves through their clothes.
Yeah.
And what might have been considered inappropriate back then is totally normal now.
I know, right? It's amazing how much fashion has changed over the years, and yet some of these airline dress codes haven't caught up.
It's like they're stuck in a time warp. Like, haven't they heard of athleisure?
Haha, exactly. It's not just about trends either. It's about recognizing that people come from different cultures and have different styles. What's considered modest in one culture could be seen as something completely different in another.
Okay, so how do we deal with that? Like, as a passenger, I don't want to offend anyone, but I also don't want to feel like I have to dress up every time I fly.
Yeah, it's a tough one. There's no easy answer. But I think the key is to be mindful of your surroundings and respectful of the people around you.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about the airlines? What can they do to make things better?
Well, they need to start by acknowledging that these outdated dress codes can be a problem, and then they need to update their policies to reflect modern times and different cultures.
Yeah, maybe they could even ask for input from fashion experts or diversity and inclusion consultants, or even just regular passengers.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Get some fresh perspectives and some real-world input, because in the end, it's about creating a travel experience that is comfortable and respectful for everyone.
well said.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we've covered a lot of ground today, from crop tops to freedom of expression to the psychology of clothing. Who knew airline dress codes could be so complicated?
Haha. It's been quite a journey, right? But I think it shows how even something as simple as what we wear can be connected to some really important and complex issues.
It's like that saying, the personal is political. Even our clothes can be a statement.
Absolutely. And in today's world, it's more important than ever to be aware of how our choices impact others.
So next time you're packing for a flight, take a second to think about your outfit. Not just if it's comfortable and stylish, but also how it might come across to other people.
And if you ever encounter a dress code that you think is unfair or discriminatory, remember you have options. Speak up, know your rights, and don't hesitate to get help if you need it.
We'll have links to some helpful resources in the show notes, so be sure to check those out.
And remember, this conversation doesn't end here. It's something we all need to keep talking about.
So true. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the surprisingly complex world of airline dress codes.
It was my pleasure. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep those minds engaged.
And most importantly, travel safe, travel comfortably, and travel in style.